Welcome to Christ the Incarnate Word from Thoughts in Solitude by the Reverend Thomas Merton, Vegetarian, Part 1 of 2 on Words of Wisdom. The Reverend Thomas Merton, an important Catholic mystic and spiritual thinker, was born in 1915 to a New Zealand father and an American mother. The many life situations he encountered in his youth led him to explore religion and spirituality and eventually to devote his life to God by becoming a monk and later a deacon at the Abbey of Gethsemane, a part of the Order of Trappists in Kentucky, USA. He also enjoyed living alone in a hermitage in the monastery's wilderness area. During his monastic life, Thomas Merton developed his writing talent by translating religious texts and writing biographies. He also penned poetry, as well as books and articles on topics ranging from spirituality to social justice and peace. One of Merton's most famous statements was, "For me to be a saint means to be myself." Therefore, the problem of sanctity and salvation is in fact the problem of finding out who I am and of discovering my true self. He also said, "We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent and God is shining through it all the time. This is not just a nice story or a fable, it is true." Believing in the equality of all religions, Thomas Merton became deeply interested in Eastern traditions in the later years of his life. He also held lively discourses with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Today, the life and works of the wise Reverend are still studied at the Thomas Merton Center in Kentucky, USA, and the International Thomas Merton Society. Today, we will read a selection from Thomas Merton's book, Thoughts in Solitude. The Reverend shares his profound insights about humility, the monastic life, and books that speak to us like God. Chapter 12. If you want to have a spiritual life, you must unify your life. A life is either all spiritual or not spiritual at all. No man can serve two masters. Your life is shaped by the end you live for. You are made in the image of what you desire. To unify your life, unify your desires. To spiritualize your life, spiritualize your desires. To spiritualize your desires, desire to be without desire. To live in the Spirit is to live for a God in whom we believe but whom we cannot see. To desire this is therefore to renounce the desire of all that can be seen. To possess Him who cannot be understood is to renounce all that can be understood. To rest in Him who is beyond all created rest, we renounce the desire to rest in created things. By renouncing the world, we conquer the world, rise above its multiplicity and recapitulate it in the simplicity of a love which finds all things in God. This is what Jesus meant when He said that anyone who would save his life will lose it, and he who would lose his life for the sake of God would save it. The 28th chapter of Job, also of Baruch 3, tells us that the wisdom of God is hidden and impossible to find, and yet ends by assuming that it is easily found, for the fear of the Lord is wisdom. A monk must never look for wisdom outside his vocation. If he does, he will never find wisdom, because for him, wisdom is in his vocation. Wisdom is the very life of the monk in his monastery. It is by living his life that the monk finds God, and not by adding something to his life which God has not put there. For wisdom is God Himself, living in us, revealing Himself to us. Life reveals itself to us only insofar as we live it. The monastic life is full of the mercy of God. Everything the monk does is willed by God and ordered to the glory of God. In doing God's will, we receive the mercy of God because it is only by a gift of His mercy that we can do His will with a pure and supernatural intention. And He gives us this intention as a grace which serves only as a means for us to obtain more grace and more mercy by enlarging our capacity to love Him. The greater our capacity to receive His mercy, the greater is our power to give Him glory, for He is glorified only by His own gifts, and He is most glorified by those in whom His mercy has produced the greatest love. He loves little who has little forgiven him. Luke chapter 7, verse 47. Chapter 14. Reading ought to be an act of homage to the God of all truth. We open our hearts to words that reflect the reality He has created or the greater reality which He is. It is also an act of humility and reverence towards other men who are the instruments by which God communicated His truth to us. Reading gives God more glory when we get more out of it, when it is a more deeply vital act not only of our intelligence, but of our whole personality, absorbed and refreshed in thought, meditation, prayer, or even in the contemplation of God. Books can speak to us like God, like men, or like the noise of the city we live in. They speak to us like God when they bring us light and peace and fill us with silence. They speak to us like God when we desire never to leave them. They speak to us like men when we desire to hear them again. They speak to us like the noise of the city when they hold us captive by a weariness that tells us nothing, gives us no peace and no support, nothing to remember, and yet will not let us escape. Books that speak like God speak with too much authority to entertain us. Those that speak like good men hold us by their human charm. We grow by finding ourselves in them. They teach us to know ourselves better by recognizing ourselves in another. Books that speak like the noise of multitudes reduce us to despair by the sheer weight of their emptiness. They entertain us like the lights of the city streets at night by hopes they cannot fulfill. Great though books may be, friends though they may be to us, they are no substitute for persons. They are only means of contact with great persons, with men who had more than their own share of humanity, men who were persons for the whole world and not for themselves alone. Ideas and words are not the food of the intelligence, but truth, and not an abstract truth that feeds the mind alone. The truth that a spiritual man seeks is the whole truth, reality, existence and essence together, something that can be embraced and loved, something that can sustain the homage and the service of our actions, more than a thing, persons or a person, Him above all, whose essence is to exist, God. Christ, the incarnate Word, is the book of life in whom we read God. Chapter 15. Humility is a virtue, not a neurosis. It sets us free to act virtuously, to serve God and to know Him. Therefore, true humility can never inhibit any really virtuous action, nor can it prevent us from fulfilling ourselves by doing the will of God. Humility sets us free to do what is really good, by showing us our illusions and withdrawing our will from what was only an apparent good. A humility that freezes our being and frustrates all healthy activity is not humility at all, but a disguised form of pride. It dries up the roots of the spiritual life and makes it impossible for us to give ourselves to God. Lord, You have taught us to love humility, but we have not learned. We have learned only to love the outward surface of it, the humility that makes a person charming and attractive. We sometimes pause to think about these qualities, and we often pretend that we possess them and that we have gained them by practicing humility. If we were really humble, we would know to what an extent we are liars. Teach me to bear a humility which shows me without ceasing that I am a liar and a fraud, and that even though this is so, I have an obligation to strive after truth. to be as true as I can, even though I will inevitably find all my truth half poisoned with deceit. This is the terrible thing about humility, that it is never fully successful. If it were only possible to be completely humble on this earth. But no, that is the trouble. You, Lord, were humble. But our humility consists in being proud and knowing all about it and being crushed by the unbearable weight of it and to be able to do so little about it. How stern you are in your mercy, and yet you must be. Your mercy has to be just because your truth has to be true. How stern you are nevertheless in your mercy, for the more we struggle to be true, the more we discover our falsity. Is it merciful of your light to bring us inexorably to despair? No, it is not to despair that you bring me, but to humility, for true humility is in a way a very real despair. Despair of myself in order that I may hope entirely in you. What man can bear to fall into such darkness? For more information about Thomas Merton, please visit merton.org. Gracious viewers, we appreciate your presence for today's Words of Wisdom.